The New Zealand government's gang patch ban is a stupid policy. Banning gang patches is a very bad and stupid idea. This policy undermines freedom of speech, corrodes freedom of expression, and contributes to the very sentiments of alienation and marginalisation that cause crime. This policy is an attack on freedom of speech and freedom of expression. This policy sets a dangerous precedent of government overreach. Sure, gang patches are bad, but like any right, the right to freedom of speech comes with the ability to do bad things. Every freedom can be misused. Every freedom can be used to do harm. But such harm is a small price to pay for freedom. When we crack down on the harmful side of freedom, we destroy our freedom. Our freedom becomes conditional. Our freedom becomes a privilege. And soon, we are not free at all. I dislike the Labour government's hate speech policy. I thought it was stupid. The right-wing parties correctly kicked up a big fuss about it, and pretended to value freedom of speech. But as soon as they held power, they happily undermined it. The gang patch ban undermines freedom of speech. It sets a precedent of the state violating freedom of speech. It normalizes the idea that freedom of speech is conditional. It normalizes the idea that freedom of speech is a privilege. It tells people that they can have free speech, but only if they use it properly. Of course, this undermines and destroys freedom of speech. Freedom of speech cannot be taken away because freedom of speech is not a privilege. Freedom of speech is a right, and that means it cannot be taken away. Some argue that gang patches should be banned because they are intimidating. Yet hate speech is intimidating, and most of the people who support the gang patch ban hated the idea of hate speech laws. This is not the politics of principle. This is mindless partisan politics. They will scream about free speech when the racists are under attack, but not when you go for the gangs. Some would argue that banning gang patches is different because it is not political speech. There are a few issues with this. Firstly, free speech does not apply simply to political speech. Secondly, gang patches arguably do possess a certain level of political significance. Thirdly, if the government is given the authority to ban non-political speech and to decide what speech counts as non-political, this represents an extremely dangerous overreach of government power. It is also the case that the gang patch ban contributes to the very feelings of marginalisation and alienation that cause crime. The gang patch ban reinforces the sense of alienation and marginalisation that causes people to join gangs. It is an unhelpful policy. It exists to virtue signal. It exists to indicate that the government is tough on crime, without actually doing anything about crime. This policy does not address crime, it is just a virtue signal that undermines freedom of speech and encourages the very sentiments that cause crime. It is pathetic. Enforcing this policy is also very dangerous. This policy puts police officers in a dangerous position for little to no community gain. This policy endangers police officers for no good reason. This policy will increase antagonism between the police and the gangs for no gain. Gangs want to be feared and outside of the rules. This policy proves nothing. Being able to easily identify gangs can also be helpful. I used to support a ban on gang patches. I used to argue for this policy. I understand why people support it, but I think that ultimately, such support is mistaken for the reasons outlined here. The government's gang patch ban is a bad policy.